My dear friends, I must tell you something that may disturb your comfortable assumptions about spiritual awakening. You have experienced what you believe to be enlightenment, perhaps a profound shift in consciousness, a moment of divine connection that promised to transform your entire existence. Yet here you are, months or perhaps years later, feeling more lost than before, drained of motivation, wandering through life as if the very spark that once ignited your soul has been extinguished. You are not broken. You are not failing. What you are experiencing is one of the most misunderstood yet crucial phases of genuine psychological and spiritual development. And today I want to explain to you exactly why this happens and what it truly means for your journey toward wholeness. Let me begin with a confession that may surprise you. Throughout my decades of exploring the human psyche, studying the collective unconscious, and witnessing countless individuals navigate their inner landscapes, I have observed that what most people call spiritual awakening is often nothing more than the first glimpse into a far more complex and demanding process. It is like standing at the edge of a vast ocean and believing you have learned to swim because you have felt the water touch your feet. The hidden reason you have no motivation after what you perceived as spiritual awakening is this: you have not truly awakened at all. Instead, you have experienced what I call the preliminary shock of recognition, a sudden awareness of the profound depths within yourself and the universe around you. This shock temporarily dissolves the comfortable illusions that previously gave your life structure and meaning, but it does not replace them with anything substantial. You are left suspended between worlds, no longer able to fully believe in your old ways of being, yet not equipped with the psychological tools necessary to navigate your new reality. Think of it this way. Imagine you have lived your entire life in a small, dimly lit room, believing this cramped space to be the entirety of existence. Suddenly, someone opens a door, and you glimpse an infinite landscape stretching beyond your comprehension. The immediate reaction is often overwhelming awe, a sense of expansion, of possibility, of cosmic connection. This is what you experienced as your spiritual awakening. But then the door closes, or perhaps it remains open, and you realize you have no map, no compass, no understanding of how to navigate this vast territory you have discovered. The motivation you once possessed was built upon the foundations of your smaller world. Your goals, your desires, your sense of purpose, all of these were appropriate to the scale of your previous understanding. But now, having glimpsed the infinite, those old motivations seem trivial, even meaningless. How can you get excited about career advancement when you have touched something eternal? How can you pursue romantic relationships with the same enthusiasm when you have felt a love that transcends all personal attachments? How can you focus on accumulating possessions when you have experienced a wealth that cannot be measured in material terms? This is the great paradox of spiritual development that so many teachers fail to address honestly. The initial opening of consciousness often destroys more than it creates. It dissolves the ego's familiar structures without providing immediate replacement frameworks. You are left in what the mystics have long recognized as the dark night of the soul, though this term has been so overused and misunderstood that it has lost much of its true meaning. What you are experiencing is not a regression or a failure of your spiritual progress. Rather, it is the necessary disintegration that must precede genuine integration. The psyche cannot simply add enlightenment to its existing structure, like adding another room to a house. True transformation requires tearing down the old foundation and rebuilding from the ground up. And this process is neither quick nor comfortable. I spent years studying what happens in the human mind during these profound transitions, and I discovered something remarkable. The individuals who successfully navigate this challenging period are not those who try to maintain their peak spiritual experiences or chase after more awakening moments. Instead, they are the ones who learn to embrace what I call the sacred emptiness, the pregnant void that exists between the death of the old self and the birth of the new. During this phase, your lack of motivation is actually a form of wisdom. Your psyche is refusing to invest energy in pursuits that no longer align with your expanded awareness. It is like a snake that stops eating before shedding its skin, conserving energy for the transformation ahead. The problem arises when you interpret this natural pause as something wrong with you, when you begin to judge yourself for not feeling excited about the things that once drove you. Let me share with you a deeper understanding of what motivation truly is. Most people believe motivation is something that comes from outside themselves, a spark that ignites when they encounter something desirable or meaningful. But I discovered through my work that genuine, lasting motivation emerges from the alignment between conscious intention and unconscious purpose. When these two forces work in harmony, action becomes effortless, not because it requires no energy, but because the energy flows naturally from the deepest source within you. Before your spiritual opening, your conscious mind and unconscious drives were likely aligned around relatively simple goals: survival, success, pleasure, recognition. These alignments created a sense of forward momentum, even if the directions were ultimately limited or even destructive. But your glimpse of expanded consciousness disrupted these alignments. Your conscious mind now knows there are greater possibilities, deeper meanings, more profound ways of being, but your unconscious patterns have not yet reorganized themselves around these new understandings. This misalignment creates what I call psychological stagnation, not because nothing is happening, but because the activity is primarily internal and invisible. Beneath the surface of your awareness, a tremendous reorganization is taking place. Old neural pathways are dissolving, new connections are forming, and your entire psychic economy is restructuring itself. This process requires enormous energy, leaving little available for external motivation or action. The tragedy is that most people, feeling this lack of external drive, conclude that their spiritual experience was somehow false or incomplete. They begin seeking more peak experiences, more awakening moments, more spiritual highs, not understanding that what they need is not more openings, but deeper integration of what has already been revealed. They become spiritual addicts, chasing the initial excitement of expansion, while avoiding the difficult work of actually transforming their lives to reflect their new understanding. I want to tell you something that may challenge your current beliefs about spiritual development. The goal is not to remain in a state of cosmic consciousness or perpetual bliss. Such states are transitional experiences, glimpses of possibility, not permanent destinations. The true purpose of these openings is to show you what becomes possible when your entire being, conscious and unconscious, personal and transpersonal, is aligned in service of something greater than your individual survival and pleasure. But achieving this alignment is a gradual process that requires patience, skill, and often guidance from someone who has successfully navigated these waters before you. It is not something that happens automatically following a spiritual experience, no matter how profound that experience might have been. It requires what I call active imagination, the conscious engagement with the unconscious forces that are trying to emerge within you. During this period of apparent motivational emptiness, your task is not to force yourself back into old patterns of enthusiasm or to desperately seek new sources of excitement. Instead, your work is to learn to listen. Listen to the subtle movements within your psyche. Pay attention to the images that arise spontaneously in your mind, the dreams that visit you at night, the unexpected emotions that surface during quiet moments. These are communications from the deeper layers of your being, attempts by your unconscious mind to show you the new directions that are trying to emerge. Most people resist this listening because it requires a kind of patience and trust that our achievement-oriented culture does not teach. We have been conditioned to believe that if we are not actively pursuing goals, accomplishing tasks, moving forward in measurable ways, then we are wasting our time or falling behind. But the psyche operates according to different rhythms than those imposed by society. It has seasons of activity and seasons of rest, periods of expansion and periods of consolidation. What you are experiencing is a consolidation period, a time when your psyche is digesting the profound material it has encountered and slowly transforming your entire psychological structure to accommodate new possibilities. This is not a passive process, even though it may feel like nothing is happening. It is actually the most active and important work you can do, because the quality of your integration during this phase will determine the depth and authenticity of whatever emerges next in your life. I observed in my clinical practice that individuals who learned to work skillfully with these integration periods often emerged with a kind of motivation that was qualitatively different from what they had known before. Instead of the driven, anxious energy that characterizes most human ambition, they developed what I call organic motivation, a natural responsiveness to life that flowed from their deepest values and understanding, rather than from external pressures or unconscious compulsions. This organic motivation does not feel like the excitement or enthusiasm you may be missing from your pre-awakening life. It is quieter, more sustainable, and far more powerful. It emerges not from wanting something you do not have, but from expressing something you have discovered within yourself. It is the difference between the frantic energy of someone trying to escape their current situation and the steady, purposeful movement of someone who knows exactly where they are going and why. But developing this organic motivation requires that you first learn to be comfortable with not knowing, with not having clear direction, with not feeling the familiar pull of desire and ambition. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the post-awakening integration period, because it asks you to trust in a process that you cannot control or fully understand. It requires faith, not in some external deity or doctrine, but in the wisdom of your own deeper nature. Let me share with you what I learned about the nature of this deeper wisdom through my years of exploration. The unconscious mind is not simply a repository of repressed memories and primitive instincts, as many of my colleagues believed. It is also the source of what I call the transcendent function, the psychological mechanism that bridges the gap between conscious understanding and unconscious wisdom. This function operates most effectively during periods of apparent stagnation, when the conscious mind finally stops its constant activity long enough to receive communications from deeper levels of being. The transcendent function works through symbols, images, dreams, and sudden insights that seem to arise from nowhere. It communicates not in the linear, logical language of ordinary consciousness, but in the poetic, metaphorical language of the soul. Learning to understand and respond to this communication is perhaps the most important skill you can develop during your integration period. Most people dismiss these subtle communications because they do not seem relevant to practical concerns or immediate problems. A dream about flying might be interpreted as mere wish fulfillment rather than a message about your soul's desire for freedom. An unexpected urge to spend time in nature might be seen as procrastination rather than an intuitive recognition of what your psyche needs for healing. A sudden interest in art, music, or poetry might be dismissed as impractical distraction rather than the emergence of new channels for authentic self-expression. But I discovered that these apparently random impulses and interests are often the first signs of your new direction beginning to emerge. They are like green shoots pushing up through the soil after a long winter, barely visible at first, but containing within themselves the blueprint for whatever wants to grow in your life. Learning to recognize and nurture these early signs requires a different kind of attention than most people are accustomed to providing. This attention I call contemplative awareness, a way of observing your inner experience without immediately judging, analyzing, or trying to change it. It is the art of simply witnessing what arises within you, treating each thought, feeling, image, or impulse as potentially meaningful, regardless of how strange or irrelevant it might seem to your rational mind. Developing contemplative awareness is not about becoming passive or withdrawing from life. Rather, it is about learning to act from a deeper place within yourself, responding to life from your center rather than merely reacting from your surface. This shift in the source of your action naturally transforms the quality of your motivation, making it less desperate and more graceful, less driven and more flowing. During this transformation period, you may find that your relationship to time itself begins to change. The urgent, linear time consciousness that dominates most people's experience gives way to what I call cyclical time awareness, a recognition that life moves in spirals rather than straight lines, that apparent setbacks are often necessary preparations for leaps forward, that periods of seeming emptiness are actually periods of invisible gestation. This shift in time consciousness can be deeply unsettling for people who have been conditioned to measure their worth by their productivity and progress. You may feel as though you are falling behind, wasting precious years, missing opportunities that will never come again. But this anxiety arises from judging your current experience according to standards that no longer apply to your situation. You are not failing to live up to your old potential. You are gestating a completely new form of potential that requires different conditions for its emergence. I want to address something that causes tremendous suffering for many people in your situation. There is often a sense of loss, grief, even mourning during this integration period. You may find yourself missing not only your old motivations, but also your old identity, your old ways of understanding yourself and your place in the world. This grief is not only normal but necessary. You are quite literally mourning the death of who you used to be. And this death is real, even though no physical body has been lost. The person who experienced that initial spiritual opening was already different from who you had been before. And the person you are becoming through this integration process will be different still. Each stage of genuine development involves the death of the previous stage. And these deaths must be honored and grieved just like any other significant loss. Trying to skip over this grief or judge yourself for feeling it only prolongs the process and increases your suffering. Allow yourself to mourn the simplicity of your old life, the clarity of your old goals, the certainty of your old beliefs. These things served you well during an earlier phase of your development, and it is appropriate to acknowledge their value even as you release your attachment to them. This honoring of what has been allows the new to emerge more gracefully and completely. As you move through this mourning process, you may begin to notice something remarkable happening. The emptiness that initially felt frightening or depressing starts to reveal a different quality. Instead of being the emptiness of loss, it becomes the emptiness of potential, pregnant with possibilities that could never have emerged from your old way of being. This shift marks the beginning of the second phase of integration, when your new direction starts to crystallize from the dissolution of the old. But this crystallization happens according to its own timeline, not according to your conscious wishes or social expectations. It cannot be rushed or forced, only supported and allowed. Your task during this phase is to remain open and attentive while avoiding the temptation to grasp at the first signs of new direction and try to turn them into concrete plans before they have fully formed. I observe that people who try to rush this process often end up creating elaborate spiritual personas rather than allowing their authentic transformation to unfold naturally. They become professional seekers or teachers before they have completed their own integration, sharing techniques and insights that they have not yet fully embodied. While this path may provide temporary relief from the discomfort of not knowing, it ultimately prevents the deeper transformation from completing itself. The genuine completion of this integration process results in what I call psychological wholeness, a condition in which the conscious and unconscious aspects of your personality work together in creative partnership rather than in conflict or mutual ignorance. When this wholeness is achieved, motivation ceases to be a problem because action flows naturally from being. You no longer need to convince yourself to pursue meaningful goals because meaningfulness becomes the natural expression of who you have become. This wholeness does not eliminate challenges, difficulties, or periods of uncertainty from your life. Rather, it provides you with the inner resources necessary to navigate these inevitable experiences with grace and wisdom. You develop what I call psychological resilience, the ability to remain centered and responsive regardless of external circumstances. But perhaps most importantly, you discover that the motivation you thought you had lost was actually being refined into something far more valuable. Instead of being driven by unconscious needs, fears, and desires, you become motivated by conscious values, authentic purpose, and love for life itself. This transformation in the source of your motivation naturally transforms the quality of everything you do. The work you choose to engage in becomes an expression of your deepest understanding, rather than merely a means of survival or status. Your relationships become opportunities for mutual growth and authentic connection, rather than attempts to fill psychological holes or meet unmet needs. Your creative expressions become channels for the transcendent to manifest in the world, rather than ego-driven attempts at recognition or success. This is the hidden gift of the motivational emptiness you are experiencing. It is clearing space for something far more authentic and sustainable to emerge. But this gift can only be received if you are willing to trust the process and resist the temptation to fill the emptiness prematurely with substitutes that merely recreate your old patterns in spiritual clothing. Let me offer you some practical guidance for navigating this challenging but ultimately rewarding period. First, establish a regular practice of solitude and silence. This does not necessarily mean meditation in any formal sense, but simply creating regular periods when you can be alone with yourself without distraction, entertainment, or the need to accomplish anything. During these periods, practice the contemplative awareness I described earlier, simply observing what arises without trying to change or understand it. Second, begin working with your dreams and spontaneous imagery. Keep a journal by your bedside and record whatever you remember upon waking, regardless of how fragmentary or nonsensical it might seem. Over time, patterns will emerge that reveal the direction your unconscious mind is trying to move you. Learn to dialogue with the images and figures that appear in your dreams, treating them as messengers from your deeper wisdom, rather than mere random neural firing. Third, pay attention to what naturally attracts your interest during this period, even if it seems unrelated to your previous goals or spiritual concerns. If you find yourself drawn to gardening, genealogy, cooking, astronomy, or any other seemingly mundane activity, explore this attraction without judgment. Often these natural interests contain clues about the new direction that wants to emerge in your life. Fourth, seek out the company of others who have successfully navigated similar transitions. This does not mean joining spiritual communities filled with people still chasing peak experiences, but rather finding individuals who embody the kind of integrated wisdom you are seeking to develop. Such people are often quiet about their spiritual achievements and may not be found in obvious places. Fifth, be patient with the people in your life who do not understand what you are going through. Your family, friends, and colleagues may interpret your current state as depression, laziness, or spiritual delusion. While their concern may be genuine, their advice is likely to be counterproductive if it encourages you to return to old patterns that no longer serve you. You may need to limit your exposure to such well-meaning but misguided input while you complete your integration process. Finally, remember that what you are experiencing has been experienced by countless others throughout human history. You are not alone in this process, even though it may feel isolating at times. The great mystics, artists, philosophers, and wisdom teachers of all traditions have walked this path of dissolution and reconstitution. Their writings and teachings can provide both comfort and guidance, but ultimately, your journey must be your own. The hidden reason you have no motivation after spiritual awakening is that you are in the midst of the most important transformation a human being can undergo. The shift from living from your surface personality to living from your essential nature. This transformation requires the temporary dissolution of everything you once relied upon for direction and meaning. It is supposed to be disorienting and challenging. That is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something profoundly right is trying to happen. Your task is not to restore your old motivation, but to allow your new motivation to emerge organically from the depths of your transformed being. This new motivation will be qualitatively different from anything you have experienced before. It will be more sustainable, more authentic, and more aligned with your deepest values and understanding. But it cannot be rushed or manufactured through effort. It must be allowed to ripen in its own time. Trust the process. Trust the emptiness. Trust the gradual transformation that is occurring beneath the surface of your awareness. What feels like stagnation is actually gestation. What feels like death is actually rebirth. What feels like the end of your spiritual journey is actually the beginning of its practical integration into every aspect of your life. The motivation you seek is not behind you. It is ahead of you, waiting to emerge when your transformation is complete. When it does emerge, you will understand why this period of apparent emptiness was not only necessary, but sacred. You will see that what you interpreted as the absence of motivation was actually the presence of something far more valuable, the patient wisdom of your own deeper nature, preparing you for a way of living that you could never have imagined from your previous level of understanding. This is the great secret that the wisdom traditions have always known, but rarely speak of directly. True spiritual awakening is not a single moment of expanded consciousness, but a lifelong process of integration and embodiment. The peak experiences are just the beginning, invitations to undertake the real work of transformation. The real work happens in the valleys, in the periods of apparent emptiness, in the slow, patient process of allowing your entire being to reorganize itself around the truth you have glimpsed. You are exactly where you need to be. What you are experiencing is exactly what you need to be experiencing. The absence of motivation is not a problem to be solved, but a stage to be honored and skillfully navigated. When you emerge from this stage, you will carry within yourself a quality of presence and purposefulness that no external circumstance can shake. You will have become what the ancient traditions called a realized human being. Not because you have achieved some supernatural state, but because you have learned to live from the deepest and most authentic aspects of your own nature. My friends, what I have shared with you today comes from decades of witnessing the human psyche in its deepest struggles and most profound transformations. The motivational emptiness you experience after spiritual awakening is not your failure, but your initiation into the most important work of human existence, the integration of transcendent understanding into practical wisdom. This integration cannot be rushed, cannot be bypassed, and cannot be accomplished through effort alone. It requires patience, trust, and the courage to remain present to experiences that your old self would have fled from or tried to fix. The motivation you believe you have lost is actually being refined in the crucible of your dissolution. When it returns, it will be transformed, authentic, and aligned with the deepest truth of who you are becoming. Trust this process. Honor this sacred emptiness. Your true life is waiting to emerge from the depths of this apparent darkness, more beautiful and meaningful than anything your previous self could have imagined.